Hello there, and thank you for joining us on this edition of Citizens Hour, your democratic citizens engaging and current affairs radio program. We are coming to you live on West Africa Democracy Radio 94.9 FM here in Dakar and online at WADR.org. We are also streaming live on YouTube and Facebook. I am Imo Edit here in Dakar, and I do have my colleague Usman Umar in Abuja co-anchoring the program. Usman. Usman, I think you can unmute your microphone.
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much, Imo, and thank you, West Africa, for having me. Indeed, we thank you for staying with us on this edition of Citizens Hour, where we bring you conversations that center on accountability, justice, and the voices of ordinary people. On today's program, as you've been told, of course, our discussions will take us to the Gambia, the smiling coast of West Africa, as it is called, where a critical chapter in the country's transitional justice process is unfolding. Of course, as you are aware, the Truth, Reconciliation and Reparations Commission, otherwise known as TRRC, has begun the payment of reparations to victims of human rights abuses committed during the 22-year rule of the former president, Yahya Jammeh. For many victims and their families, these payments represent more than just financial support. They symbolize recognition, dignity, and an attempt to heal wounds that have remained open for decades. However, questions remain about access, adequacy, and the long-term impact of these reparations. In this edition, we examine what this compensation means for victims, the challenges involved for the government, and how far the Gambia has come and still needs to go on the path to justice and reconciliation. Imo.
Yes, and on the other half of the program, we will shift to Guinea-Bissau following the junta's review of the country's constitution, a move that has raised serious questions about democracy, civilian rule, and the future of governance in the country. Our guests will try to respond to some of the questions that will be asking what the constitution review really means for Bissau Guineans and the political future the country holds, and if it is a step towards reform and stability, or that they see it as a threat to democratic norms. So stay with us for all of this and more. All right, if you're just tuning in, this is Citizens Hour coming to you live on West Africa Democracy Radio 94.9 FM Dakar, and we are streaming live on Facebook and YouTube at WDR English. You can be part of this conversation by dropping a message on the comment section. Now, let's bring on board our guests for this first part. Joining us from Banjul, the Gambian capital, is Sira Njo, chairperson of the Alliance of Victim-Led Organization AVLO, an organization dedicated to championing and representing the interests of victims of human rights violations during the former president's era. Well, welcome, Madam Sira, to the program.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mo. I'm very pleased to be here. We appreciate the opportunity to talk about this very important chapter in the Gambia's history, as you mentioned.
Welcome.
Also joining us from the Gambia is Yusuf Taylor. He's the editor for Askanwi Media, and he has been following and monitoring this very development very closely. Welcome to the program, Mr. Yusuf.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here with you. Indeed.
Indeed, it's great to have both of you on the program. Well, Madam Sira, let's start with you. For Alliance AVLO is made up of several human rights organizations. From this perspective, how significant is the start of reparations for victims of the Jammeh era? And do you see these reparations as justice delivered or justice delayed?
Thank you very much. Before I begin, I just want to make a quick maybe clarification on the process. It was mentioned in the beginning that the TRRC is making payments of compensation. Just want to clarify that the TRRC was dissolved as per the Act back at the end of their mandate in 2021, early 2022. So the TRRC no longer exists. What has been set up is the Reparations Commission on a new act, the Victims Reparations Act of 2023, that was enacted by the National Assembly. So it is this Reparations Commission that was, they were sworn in April of last year, who is actually responsible for the reparation, and more specifically components of compensation, rehabilitation, and restitution. So just for that clarification, that it's the Reparations Commission, which has the mandate now. It's a different mandate than the TRRC. Of course, the TRRC began reparations in 2021 towards the end of their mandate, and made in what it was called interim reparations. They had awarded victims based on the reparation policy guidelines that they had developed at the time, and had awarded 1,009 victims reparations in terms of compensation amounts, and have been providing rehabilitation throughout their mandate as well. So just for that clarification. In terms of the significance to victims, of course, it's a big deal for victims who have been waiting for this moment of acknowledgement, a moment of recognition, more so than anything else, because for some of them it's been over 30 years. Those whose rights were violated back in 1994, it's been over 30 years for them to finally get to this point of acknowledgement, of recognition, of some form of justice at some point, at some level rather. So definitely a very significant moment. It's been overdue, delayed, well, of course delayed, because this happened a long time ago. TRRC ended and made their recommendations in 2021. The act was not enacted until 2023, and then further administrative processes going on with the establishment of the Reparations Commission itself being set up, hiring of personnel and resourcing it happening only in 2025. So definitely, it's been long overdue, but it's here now. That's what is important. We acknowledge it. It's appreciated. Adequate. Well, how do you, for example, pay for a life that's been taken? Somebody who's been tortured and family member that's no longer able to work. How do you pay for that? You can't. So it's a matter of looking for some form of satisfaction where the victims are taken care of and their lives beginning to be recovered again. Thank you.
Okay, I think I want to just follow up quickly. You've touched on it, but a lot of questions are being asked. Why now? And isn't this some form of gesture by the political class to buy the silence of the people? Because, of course, as you are aware, Gambia is approaching a major election, and sometimes gestures such as this are seen more from the political viewpoint. Do you agree with this?
Of course, I mean, politics is always part of the process. You cannot divorce politics from any process in any country. We've seen what happened in Chad, where I think on the eve or very close to the elections, when the son of former Debbie, the president Mahatma Debbie, ordering reparations just maybe I think it was the eve before the elections of a fraction of what was awarded. I cannot divorce politics from it, but this is a commitment, a legal obligation by the government. Whether they do it before the election, they can choose to do that, but it's a legal obligation by the state that they owe the victims. As far as we are concerned, the process has been going on. The award was made the commission set up last month. Of course, it's been a lot of delay. I cannot say whether it's been delayed for the purpose of election, but it could have been earlier. It would have been better if it was earlier. But it's ongoing. Again, election year is significant. The commission actually started in December, because when they were inaugurated, sworn in April, they met the victims and promised to start before the end of the year. And they, in line with that promise, they began payments by the end of the year. It's the first phase that has been happening. That started. the 1,009 victims are the ones that they're prioritizing who were recognized by the TRRC. Their mandate also includes entertaining and looking at receiving new claims from victims who did not go to the TRRC or were not addressed by the TRRC. And of course, reviewing also, one of their mandates also reviewing the awards that were given to victims. But yes, you cannot divorce politics from it. But for us, we focus on the interest of the victims and try to push the government to do it as soon as possible to make sure that the victims are not further being denied the justice that they deserve.
Well, let me bring on board Mr. Eustapi. I mean, in your line of career, you have been closely following this process. Do you think financial compensation truly can address the depth of harm suffered by victims and their families?
Thank you for that question. That's a very important question. And I'm sure I can see the AVLO president certainly very keen about this. Because one thing which I always say is, if we took all the money that was supposed to be paid to victims and threw it to victims and said, there's your money, get on with your lives, that will not address the problem. So there needs to be a lot of compassion. There needs to be an element of the society themselves seeing victims in a different perspective. And of course, this, obviously you can't do this without a lot of sensitization, which is where the media comes in. So compensation is not, and I would always say it's not, cannot be limited to monetary value only. Even when it comes to monetary value, $1 million that comes from the former president's funds would mean totally different from $1 million that comes from anywhere. Let's just say taxpayers' funds. So those two are very different. So there's an element of compassion that is needed. The funds, of course, need to come. And ideally, coming from funds that has been recovered from the sales of the former president's assets. If you, and Sarah talked about the fact that there is a reparations commission. So in that reparations commission, there's an act and it states that these sources of funds, the former president's assets, sales of those are also sources of funds that should be paid to victims. So it's legally codified, but I think definitely what we've seen, myself here as a journalist who has been observing the process, is that in 2021, when the commission was there about closing the TRRC and wrapping up, they made the first set of interim reparations, and also they made some residual reparations payments. So they've already started the reparations and the funds have come, but where are they coming from? From our investigation, my investigation, what we've unearthed is that the money has all come from Senegal. 50 million, which the government presented and promised that they would match it, is coming from the sale of Senegal's rosewood. So that really points to the fact that the government itself needs to try to make sure that assets, over 1 billion of Jammeh's sales assets have been sold. Those assets, the question continues, where have those monies gone? Those monies alone would have been able to address all the victims' compensation concerns and many, many, many other things. So to answer your question, there needs to be a lot more than just money, but the source of funding and a lot of compassion.
Well, you talked about...
Then, of course, Mr. Yusuf. Oh, okay, sorry, Mo. I wanted to just follow up on that line of thought because he has made a very valid and very important observation. Money is not enough. And the question I want to ask has to do with institutional memory versus this symbolic gesture. Of course, during the Yahya Jammeh's era, we remember very painfully junglers. Of course, that is the name given to Yahya Jammeh's hit squad, and they come from the military. Now, beyond these individual checks being cut to families and members and that are victims of that era, what other measures do you think need to be put in place to ensure that we do not revisit such a very painful memory that we will now have to come set up TRRC in the future.
That's a very important issue, and it touches at the heart of the never again mantra of the TRRC. So the Transitional Justice and the TRRC is Truth, Reconciliation and Reparations Commission. So the reparations that we see is just one element of the whole transitional justice aspect. One of the things which victims and many concerned Gambians have been highlighted to make sure that we can reinforce that never again message is to see prosecution take place in Gambia here. We've already seen one of them, Yankuba, who was one of the main leaders of the junta that took over. Obviously, he has been prosecuted and he's serving life. Now, we've also seen one of the junglers, since you talk about the junglers, Sana Manjang, he's also been apprehended in Senegal not too long ago, and he has been brought into Gambia. Even this week, he has been arraigned and he has pleaded not guilty. So that prosecution is taking place. But what the victims have seen, and this is because, as you've said, I've been following the process, I had the opportunity last year to travel to America, where the trial of Michael Sankoria took place. And for that trial, what ended up happening, it was fast-tracked. It was very quickly done within 2 weeks. Am I still with you? Are you still getting me?
Yes, we can hear you.
We're with you.
There's no interruption.
We can hear you. Go ahead, please.
Okay. Seems like there must be.
We're with you.
Let's see.
Please go ahead, Mr. Youssef. We can hear you loud and clear. Okay, while we wait for Mr. Youssef to return online, let's cross over to Madam Sira. What are some of the criteria you will say the government or the Reparations Commission is using in considering the reparations process? And are there still some groups that are excluded in this compensation?
No, there's no exclusion, and that's one of the things that is very important to us, that there's no exclusion. There's a process of recognizing the victims through a claim process that they have established, where we are able to establish, where we're able to maybe verify, I would say, the information provided. There's it's limited to the mandate of the TRRC. However, if you look at it in that sense, actually, there's no exclusion, but the TRRC's mandate also was kind of limited. It's limited to certain human rights violations that were listed, and the Reparations Act picked up those violations. What is excluded in that case would be some land issues. It's not included in the reparations process. If it was a land matter, it's not included because the TRRC did not address that. But as far as the TRRC's mandate was concerned, the Reparations Commission picked up all the violations. The criteria being used is the different types of violations that people suffered, and have put out a policy guideline really giving like a points-based system, awarding points for types of violation. For example, the highest point would be given to somebody who lost their life, somebody who has been disappeared, and then you would have torture, SGBV, and arbitrary arrest and so forth, given different points. And based on those points is how they would consider for the compensation aspect of it as well. The policy also does not differentiate when it comes to victims, when it comes to whether it's a direct victim or indirect victim. For example, family members of victims are also considered, particularly when it comes to the rehabilitation aspect of it. Family members of victims being supported for medical rehabilitation and provided with psychosocial support. So it's quite comprehensive, and there was some consultation also when it came to the policy with the compensation with the victims community and the victim organizations, along with AVLO, that we sat together, looked at the compensation policy, and put forward our comments and our feedback. Of course, the commission has the mandate, and it is their process. They have to come up with at the end of the day. But for the most part, the efforts have been done to consult with victims and to look at how the compensation would work, and agreeing on prioritizing the 1,009 victims who already are owed balances. We mentioned both Flex Yusuf and I mentioned that there was interim reparation by the TRRC. So some people were paid a percentage of what they are owed. So it is those people who are owed balances that are being given the priority right now.
Well,
And they are starting with the year of violation.
Well, in as much
I
as
guess
yes, Madam Chair, in as much as the compensation is ongoing, there are also many victims who are arguing that this compensation amount that they are receiving is inadequate, and they are saying, why don't the commission make it a flat rate, because there may not be an amount measuring pain of a victim. Don't you think this would have sufficed to quell whatever argument or problem that would have emerged from this process?
from where we sit here, I think that the argument for most victim has been that it would not be fair to do a flat rate, because the violation itself is different. If somebody lost their life and some lost their life or found their loved one, and then somebody was arrested for 2 days and released, you cannot really. I think it would be unfair to give the same compensation. So this is one of the things that we were involved in the process of the reenactment or the bill, and through the validation consultation was done with the victims as to how do we go about this, and we agreed at that point that it should be based on violation and not giving a flat rate. We have seen what happened in other jurisdictions where flat rate was given, in Sierra Leone in particular and Chad, where they just across the board gave the same amount to all victims, and there was a big outcry that this was not fair for somebody who was arrested one day and then somebody who was who lost their life or was disappeared or were tortured on top of that. So this is why it was agreed that it would be done that way. And for us, at our level and where we sit, it seemed to be fair to do that. In terms of adequacy, like I said in the beginning, you cannot begin to compensate for what was done. But yes, there could be a substantial amount that could make a difference in the lives of the victims, which is why we argued and have put in the legislation the mandate for the commission to revisit these numbers that were awarded by the TRRC and to look at reviewing them and perhaps in later on in the future, looking at the possibility of increasing those amounts to more suitable, more substantial amounts that could make a difference in people's lives. Not just also one of the things we're hoping is not just something that would be just a cash that is given to the victims, but other programs maybe that could be explored that could make a difference in victims' lives. Cash will even if you give people 10 million cash, sometimes it really cannot make that much of a difference.
Are you talking about
Excuse me.
healthcare, psychological support, and the rest of them?
No, I'm talking about also socio-economic, economic measures and socio-economic measures. When it comes to healthcare, the commission is mandated with also healthcare, and they have been provided. There's been healthcare provision that has been from the TRRC. Healthcare has been was being provided to a lot of victims, locally, both locally and overseas treatment, and that has been continued. There's a medical board that's been set up specifically just to address the healthcare needs of victims. Psychosocial support. The resources have been inadequate. Let's not let me not this solution. The resources that have been provided has not been adequate, but there has been some provision of medical support, psychosocial support, education support, and even some livelihood support at some level.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Yusuf, do we have you back?
Yes, I'm back again. Sorry for the
All right.
internet
no problem.
challenges, unfortunately. Yeah.
It happens. Good to have you back. And of course, as you could hear, we're still talking about the gap that exists between the recommendations by the TRRC in terms of budget and what is actually available for the reparations commission to carry out this very important mandate. From your own point of view, having followed this very process for a very long time, do you foresee some concerns like Madam Sira mentioned about what happened in Sierra Leone as a result of differentiation in terms of the amount given to victims based on what kind of abuses they suffered? Do you foresee any problem also coming out of this process at the end of the day or even before it ends? And do you think that the Reparations Commission actually have measures on ground to be able to contain some of these bubbles when they come up?
Yes, when it comes to compensation, you will always have this issue because we are compensating people's what you're not really paying them. You're just giving them something to sort of acknowledge that they have suffered and that what happened to them was not right. So there will always be concerns, and I foresee this being a problem. But I must acknowledge that they have taken a lot of steps with the TRRC to make sure that there will not be the concerns that, oh, you are not compensating me fairly compared to another. They've tried to sort of give it some sort of a, if you could say, standard. So for example, if somebody passes away, a victim who is killed, they're all given $600,000. And this also has issue, talking about whether they will be challenged. Some West Africans, Ghanaians mostly, 2 of them came to the Gambia last year. And if you can remember, there were some 44 or 54 West Africans that were killed.
Yeah.
Some of them junglers killed them. So what has happened is these people did come in not long ago, and they were raising awareness about what happened to their family members. And they're demanding up to $1 million, not dollars. So if you see that there's obviously a gap between what victims would feel they should be compensated. But I feel that the Reparations Commission are putting in some measures. Now, the issue is, though, there's a delay. And the longer this continues, the more, some people will feel more like you are not prioritizing them, because of government is prioritizing a lot of different things. But whether are they prioritizing? Talking about the budget, and I've been following it every year to assess how much is the government giving to victims. For many years, they kept putting in inflated figures, 100 million, 150 million, huge amounts of millions in the budget for years. But then that money never came. And the argument was that they never had a reparations commission. The government said that they wanted to bring a reparations commission, which to some of us advocates felt that that would also cost. Why don't you just finish off the work? Regardless, the commission eventually established, after years of putting in big figures, 75 million, 100 million, 150 million, the year that the commission was finally, decided and sworn in, they received the lowest ever amount, which was 20 million. And even that 20 million last year, the victims were sent, the Reparations Commission were sent 17.5 million for payment of compensation.
Is that the final cap on the total amount for compensation, Mr. Yusuf?
So on a yearly basis, I assess the budget. So for the last year, they had given the victims 17.5 million. It was allocated to the Reparations Commission, right? And that is the money that they are doing right now, paying off victims. The same is allocated in the 2026 budget, I can tell you that, from assessing the budget which has been approved. The same amount is also approved in the 2026 budget. So this is a continuous process. On a yearly basis, the government will be allocating amounts of money, but you cannot talk about this without highlighting that there is a $1.5 or $2.5 million Potomac mansion. For us that have been arguing, we believe that the price of that mansion should be more than 3.5 million because property assets increase in America. Now that money, the US government, through the US embassy here, has pledged that that money is going to go to the Reparations Commission. And I know in my investigation, which I've published, that there are actions towards that happening. The only question is, will it be $3.5 million? We're not talking about dollars here. Or will it be less? Now, I know if it is $3.5 million, it will go a long way to address almost most of the concerns on the reparation side for the victims. And this is what we're
may I come in?
Please,
may I come in, please?
Yes,
that?
go ahead.
Yes, yes. I just wanted to jump on what Flex has said. Yes. So of course, what she mentioned, she talked about us, right? Before the commission, within 150 million or so were allocated to the reparations by the government when there was no mechanism put in place to disburse those, and that was the excuse being given that there was no mechanism put in place. In terms of the Potomac, Flex, I just want to confirm. I think the sale of this property has been confirmed, and the amount is
Yes.
2.5 million. That is expected, that has been pledged to go to the Victims Reparations Fund. Now,
That is 2.5 million US dollars.
Or dollars?
Yes, 2.5 million US dollars that has been
Okay.
that has been to be sold for and has been pledged to go to the Victims Reparations Commission. I just want to highlight that just wanted to jump on what Flex said. This will address most of the victims' concerns. I kind of disagree on that because already the budget, when the TRRC's allocations that were given to awards that were given to victims, 1,009 victims at the time, total up to 258 million, about 258 million, 238. US the Gambian dollars. At the end of the day, when they made compensations, they were left with a balance of 168 million Gambian dollars. Now that 2.5 million dollars US dollars, if you convert it to dollars, it will just about cover the balance that is owed to the 1,009 victims. It is not making provision for the new claimants that are expected to come and are already started coming forward. It has not made it will not also cover the rehabilitation process or the restitution process. So there's still a lot of gap that will be happening with the 2.5 million will not be adequate even cover everything that we are looking for. So Flex, the amount we are looking for is much more than that 2.5 million.
Yes,
that
which
we
is
need
exactly
to,
what. Yeah.
Yes.
Which is exactly
So
why I
just
said
say that
3.5. This is why I
well,
said
well,
for
the
me,
3.5 million is what it was assessed for by the US, I think. But when you're assessing, valuing something and selling something can be different. Anyway, that process is already done and closed. We cannot go back and revisit this. There's no point crying over spilled milk.
So,
what we are saying now is the 2.5 million that has been sold and is pledged to the Reparation Commission. Like I said, the process has already begun. The US government is working with the Reparations Commission to transfer this amount to the reparations fund, and that will be good. That will go quite a substantial way in addressing the balance that is owed to victims currently by the government. We are talking about also the commission reviewing those amounts that were awarded by the TRRC to revise them upwards, and we also have new claimants that will be coming forward and have already started coming forward. So yes, there's still a long way to go. The 20 million being awarded by the Gambia government is really inadequate. Trex mentioned the sale of Jammeh's assets with the Gambia that amounted to over $1 billion that victims have not seen. That is something that the government should have been tapping into to really make sure that we are not here, because these were sold a while back. If the government had tapped into those assets, we would not even be here talking about these things. This would have been a done deal a long time ago. We'll be now talking about the more longer term processes of rehabilitation for the victims and restitution, working on reconciliation and working on even the other aspects of the reparations process, like memorialization, the reforms that we should be going on, which also would cost quite a bit of money. But if really the government has focused on that, the sale of Jammeh's assets that were so huge, and it will have been even more meaningful, like Flex said in the beginning, where the perpetrator itself, his assets are being used to address these harms, would have also been more meaningful than taking taxpayers' monies to address, and even more fair than taking taxpayers' monies to address these issues.
Okay, Madam Sarah, before I let you go, of course, you have worked with victim-led organizations. From your own viewpoint, do you think the victims would have been better off if much or most of this money are being channeled towards economic empowerment measures rather than this handout, so to speak, that we are now battling over whether it's enough, it's adequate or not? Do you think the victims would have been better off?
I don't think it's a menu. It is not a menu. It is not a menu where you can choose one and give this victim one. The law says that they're entitled to compensation. So I wouldn't say it a handout. The law says that they're entitled to compensation. They're entitled to satisfaction through rehab, through memorialization, through judicial processes, and all of these other things. When you talk about reparations, it's not just about compensation. There is also the responsibility of the government to take care of their health and to take care of most of their needs, including socio-economic needs. If they have suffered, for example, people lost their income, lost their businesses. So this is not a menu where you are saying that, oh, let's give them this and not that one. one, or let's privatize this one. They have the right to all of these things that are out there according to law, and this is what we are pushing for. Not just compensation is just one aspect of it. Giving compensation doesn't mean it is over. We keep pushing for these people, their lives and their livelihoods to be transformed after they have been, unduly disadvantaged through the violation that they suffered. So no, the compensation that they're given is something that they're entitled and they should have. Whatever comes else is should come to them, not an option. It's not a menu where you can give them one and look at the other. People say that, well, you should look at their health and not compensation. But compensation is their right that they're entitled to. Rehabilitation, medical support, economic support is their right that they're entitled to. The government should work on all of those aspects, not one or the other.
Well, Mr. Yusuf, let me come to you, please. What message do you think this reparation process is sending about state accountability for past human rights violations?
Yes, I think it sends a message that definitely, no matter how long, a human rights violation has taken place, in this case, in some instances, over 20 to 30 years, we're talking about. Victims are due their due, which is compensation for human rights violation. And it's very important that, people also start to realize that compensation is not the end all, as Sarah was just saying. Compensation is not a form of payment in the, open sense of it all. It's just a form of appeasement. So I think when you look at the Gambia's process, one thing which stands out is that procedurally, and this has been one of the things that people always say about Gambia, we're very good at putting things in documents, having the right policy. We have a very inclusive process, one must say, and even the Reparations Commission is becoming very, very inclusive in the way it's doing its work. But then when it comes to the final output, which is dealing with the whole issue of reparation, my estimation is that if we continue at this rate, the Reparations Commission has a limited time span. It's not a commission which has unlimited time span. If victims are not compensated sufficiently at this rate, 20 million, the commission will not have all the money it needs to address all the needs of the victims. Time is of the essence when you talk about reparations. And one thing the government has not been doing well is making sure that it acts in a timely manner. My story highlights that numerous victims have died without receiving their reparations. And those victims, had they been paid their reparations in time, would have at least received that whilst they are alive. So the government is trying. Gambia is really trying to do a very inclusive process, but political will still remains a challenge. And hopefully, before 2026 presidential elections, I think this is the time that all the politicians, many of them, will start chipping in, giving their own sound bites as to how they would deal with this differently.
Well, Usman, just before Usman, sorry, just before you comment, I wanted to throw this question at Madam Sira in terms of the reparations process affecting public trust and in the government and justice institutions. How has this functioned? Is it making the people to build a trust more in the system of the government, or there is some shaky trust by the citizens?
Trust is still shaky, whether it's through the reparations process itself or through the other, transitional justice mechanisms that are in place in the Gambia. Trust is still shaky, and the government has been, like Frex said, there's been a lot of delay, and there's a lot of some of these changes that are not being felt on the ground. Is when you talk about security sector reform, for example, we're not seeing some of these effects on the ground. We continue to see, and in some cases, even regressing backwards when it comes to security sector, to security in the Gambia, and how the state deals with people, dealing with civil society. Flex himself was arrested in a process recently, and there's so many things that have been we seeing taking us back. We saw after the last elections, the president appointing the speaker of the house, who was one of the enablers of Yahya Jammeh. Both the speaker and his deputy speaker were enablers of Yahya Jammeh, but were appointed as by the president. And we also saw the president coming into an alliance with the Yahya Jammeh's former party. So really, these are things not just around reparations, like I said, but around the transitional justice process. For a government who came into power on a transitional justice agenda, it's been quite disappointing. Some of the things have been quite disappointing. We believe that we could have been, furthermore up the ladder when it comes to addressing these issues, the past issues, but also in terms of preventing this from happening. But there's still quite a lot of vulnerability. And still quite some bit of concern when it comes to the way the government is operating, when it comes to corruption, which is also some of the issues that we face, and has really, Flex is in the media, he can tell you more about this. These are all challenges that we're facing, and really the trust is still really, I would say, very much shaky. There has been, of course, processes, and comparatively comparing with other jurisdictions, the Gambia is being hailed as a model, but on the ground, in reality, the lived experience really is short of that utopia that it may sound like from outside, and victims continue to suffer, like Flex said, and a good number of them are dying, have died, and are continuing to die, and really a lot of challenges still on the ground. There's very much a lot more room for improvement for the country, with the government and the civil society organizations, and all of us are collectively as Gambians and as partners, stakeholders in this process, including also our international partners as well.
Okay. Of course, you've said that there are some weaknesses on ground, even though Gambia is being hailed as being a leader in this regard. Of course, before now we've seen what was done in Sierra Leone. But are there lessons to be learned by other African countries coming out of authoritarian regimes by what Gambia is doing, as shaky and as things may be on the ground? Are there lessons to be learned from what is being done right now in the Gambia?
Of course, there's always lessons to be learned. And for us, really, one of the key things that has been very strong in Gambia is it could be the stronger, but of course, there's always room for improvement, is really the involvement of victims associations in the process, victims participation through the victim organizations that have really been very strong in the Gambia. And really a close and a good relationship between the government through the Minister of Justice and civil society and the victims has been really one of the key things in our process that has helped us push forward in this aspect. It's been more inclusive compared to other countries where the participation of victims through the organizations and engagement really I would say a more compassionate approach. It has been with the government, where yes, you may not see the promise, but there's been a more compassionate approach that this can be learned from. And then also just one of the things also that could be learned is that you just keep pushing, no matter what the challenges are. You keep pushing, regardless of what the challenge. There will always be challenges. There will never be 100% satisfaction. And government, there's always distraction. But the commitment to keep pushing, regardless, is one of the things that we really need to that can be learned from the case of the Gambia. And it is understanding and appreciating that it's a long-term process. It is not a one-day affair. And these are things that definitely other countries could learn from the Gambia.
Indeed. Well, let me cross over to Mr. Yusuf as we round off this first part of our conversation. Madam Sira has talked about lessons to be learned by other African countries who are also going through this process. But how important is international support and monitoring in ensuring the credibility of reparations? And when we talk about international support, we're also looking at regional bodies like our ECOWAS and the African Union, perhaps.
Yes, this is crucial. And even in the Gambia situation, we're seeing the impact of the um, pull out of the US government when it comes to our transitional justice process, right? International support is very critical. In fact, this highlights that African countries need to be more dependent when it comes to, running these processes and less reliant on international partners, because then you have less autonomy to, control the whole process, the whole narrative, which I believe is very, very important. So this is one of the areas which is certainly been a concern. For example, in the Gambia, we need a lot of funds to establish what we are calling a tribunal. We want to have an international tribunal here in the Gambia. And then there's also a domestic court where we are going to go ahead with some more prosecutions, which can be done within our local laws, because there are some crimes that we cannot prosecute only in when it comes to international laws. So Gambia, if we talk about lessons learned, these are some of the cutting edge efforts, from what I understand, talking to lawyers, that the Gambia has implemented, a dual approach, international and local. So, but it all comes down to political will, which is where our own governments need to pull money from their own funds to prioritize the process. One of the leading legal luminaries, if I would put it that way, Sal Tal, has said that the government should write the checks. If they are to prove their commitment, the government should write the checks themselves. So this is very, very, very important, because without the funding, you won't be able to get the international tribunal to kick off, right? So this also highlights that political will is very, very, very important when you talk about this process. And political will is not only about what you do with the policy, but also how you prioritize the budget to fund some of these things, and not just waiting and saying that, you know what, since we feel that the international partners would support this, let's just leave it all on them. So that's
all
very
right,
important.
Thank you very much, Mr. Youssef. And of course, as a way of rounding off from your end, Madam Sira, you work with the victims directly, or you work with organizations that work with the victims directly. What would you be saying to those victims who still feel that justice is not being done despite this compensation that is ongoing?
Madam Sira, are you there?
Madam Sira.
Okay, I think
On my end, quite badly. I'm not able to hear your question. The line is cutting out badly at my end.
Okay, good to have you back on anyway. So the question I was asking as your closure is, there are victims who will still say justice is not being done, despite this effort by the government at paying compensation and reparations. What would you be saying to such victims?
I would say that what they're saying is valid, because, justice is about who, is an individual thing. How do I perceive justice and how you perceive justice could be different. So if one victim feels that justice is not being done, who am I to say that is not the case? It's a different experience. What they know what they have experienced, so it is valid. I would say that when this is the difficulty when it comes to when there has been widespread injustice and these kind of violations. Satisfaction can never be will never be 100%. And that is something that we have to accept and agree on. When people say that they don't feel that justice is done, it is there. It is what it is their right to say what they feel is happening. So in that case, we accept it and we move on. What is important is that really everybody is doing the best that they can, the optimal that we can do, making sure that they are taking care of to the best of as much as we can, prioritizing, making it a priority, really acknowledging it, and really going above and beyond. When those efforts are made, and also importantly, efforts in guaranteeing of non-repetition is a very important aspect of it. We don't want to have this being repeated, so it really is important aspect of it. But yes, it's a process that unfortunately, justice will never be truly done completely 100%. This is something that we would have to live with as Gambians, as human beings. But putting the efforts that we don't put other people in the future in such positions where they have to go through these things. I think that is what is important, really, moving forward. But 100% justice can never be, after the violations, can never be achieved.
Thank you very much. We do sincerely thank you for joining us. Madame Sira Ndo, she's the chairperson of the Alliance of Victim-Led Organization, AVLO, an organization dedicated to championing and representing the interest of victims of human rights violations during the former president's era. Thank you very much for joining us. And of course, Mr. Youssef Taylor, he is the editor for As Can We Media, and he has been closely following this development. He has also joined us to share with us his own insights on this very, very important conversation. Thank you very much for our guest. As we now turn our attention to our second conversation, of course, we'll be going to Guinea-Bissau, where the military government has concluded the review of the country's constitution. Now, this is coming after years of political instability and repeated military interventions. This constitutional review is unfolding at a time when many citizens in Guinea-Bissau and observers are calling for a return to full constitutional order. While the authorities argue that the process is necessary to stabilize the state, critics are warning that military influence over constitutional reform would weaken democratic institutions and set very troubling precedents in West Africa and even beyond. So, what does this constitutional review really mean for Guinea-Bissau's political future? Is it a step toward reform and stability, or a threat to democratic norms? Is this reform in the interest of the people of Guinea-Bissau, or in the interest of the strong man in power at the moment? Imo.
Indeed, a strong man in power. Well, to answer all of these questions and more is David Asante Dako. He is the research analyst with West Africa Democracy Solidarity Network, WADR, based in Accra, Ghana. Mr. David, thank you so much for finding time to join us on Citizens Hour, and welcome. Mr. David, can you hear us?
I think I saw him join us earlier.
Yes.
Mr. David?
Well, he may be having some...
okay, he has unmuted. I think he didn't unmute earlier, but he has unmuted. Mr. David, can you hear us now?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear. Welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me, and good morning.
Indeed. Thank you for joining us. Let's quickly go straight to our first question. Well, how unusual do you think it is for a constitution to be reviewed under a military-led government? And what risk do you think this poses, especially to democratic legitimacy?
Well, that in Guinea-Bissau since November 26th last year. So you have a very suspicious coup, a coup that has raised suspicions that it was being orchestrated by a president who was being ousted democratically. And now we have a junta that appears on the scene, and their first order of business is revising a constitution which, under the immediate past president, was one of the biggest issues of contention between government and the executive. So there is the issue of confidence going forward. how much Bissau Guineans going to be willing to comply with this new constitution, and how much confidence does it inspire in the population going forward? These are all very pertinent questions that this particular revision raises. That is aside the issue of the degree of, public involvement in the revision of this constitution. You have a National Transition Council made up of 65 members in a country with a population a little over 2 million. And these people, one way or the other, are all aligned with the new regime, not to talk of the disproportionate involvement of the military in the entire process. So there are lots of questions that come up when you take a look at the whole picture.
Well, what about
quite a lot of questions? Okay, go ahead, Imo. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to chip this in. What about the credibility of future elections in Guinea-Bissau?
Could you kindly repeat the question? I didn't hear you. There was a glitch.
I mean, what about the credibility of future elections in Guinea-Bissau?
Well, at this point, you see, that is a very tricky one, because we had a legitimate election be truncated by the junta. Already people are still pressing on the AU and ECOWAS to remove this junta and declare the results of that election. So future elections are not necessarily a subject for some, because they feel there is an election that is yet to be concluded. I mean, the results and everything are there. It is just the procedures by which those results will be declared, because given the fact that the Electoral Commission claims it doesn't have the results anymore, there are a whole lot of technical and legal issues that come up. But then I don't think many people will easily buy into the idea of a new election. And even if they accept it because that is the only option they have, there are always going to be doubts at the back of their mind. That will affect the legitimacy of whichever government is taking office after the junta. We are hoping that, a democratically elected one will. And people are always going to, be in a limbo as to how much submission they owe this new government, whose legitimacy is always questionable and hanging in the balance.
Well, I've been a Nigerian, and of course, having read about and witnessed some myself, who by the military in a number of cases years down the line. The one for Guinea-Bissau, as you have said, tops the list of what I would say a very, very kind of surprising coup, where you have a sitting president by himself coming forward to announce that he has just been ousted out of office. But having said all of this, the beginning chapter of every constitution is always about we, the people, meaning that whatever you're going to read going forward is coming from the people, and there's that lends it some level of credibility. And now, before we even talk about elections, the constitutional review has been concluded already, which will serve as the basis for conducting government businesses going forward. Let's even assume without conceding that the people of Guinea-Bissau accept this constitutional review, and then we come back to say, okay, let's conduct an election. What level of credibility will this constitution have to determine the future of the country democratically going forward?
That credibility will always also be in question. The reason being, it is quite apparent that the outgone president had lots of issues with the government at the time, which was run by the opposition mainly.
Yes.
And their disagreement centered primarily on some elements of the constitution, which kind of created disputes and uncertainty around the separation of powers, especially when it came to the government's powers and those of the president. That is the government under the prime minister and the executive branch of government. So seeing that right after this president is removed under some pretty suspicious circumstances, the new junta that comes into force seems to be towing a line that favors the outgone president. There is an issue of credibility. There is an issue of credibility there. You cannot deny that one. Already the suspicions are that he conducted a self-coup so that he could get this junta in. So if that is the case, and we are yet to see this junta go by a line or toe a line that is not aligned with what the outgone president would have done. That is very suspicious. We haven't yet seen anything that is contrary to what the outgone president would be expected to do or would have done were he still in power and had he had his way with the parliament that he dissolved twice.
Are you saying that the outgone president may be walking hand in hand of some sort with the military? I mean, if you say that nothing really has changed if he was still in power.
Well, there are some very credible documents that even make that claim that Embalo is still the one in charge. There are credible sources that are that explicit. So in light of that, there are lots of questions, regarding this particular constitution. Mind you, Guinea-Bissau's constitution has always had some challenges, regarding the distribution, the separation of powers. And that is a challenge that has dogged this constitution since it was last reviewed in 1995. That one is a given. Then we have this, rather peculiar issue of a junta coming in not ahead of elections. You see, elections in Guinea-Bissau have always had, some of these challenges. And we've had many elections be preempted. Okay, but this is the first time, as far as I can tell, in Africa, where you have the election being conducted. And right around the time the results are about to be declared, there is a coup. In all the other instances, what usually happens is the coup comes sometimes weeks ahead of the election. So the last time such a thing happened in Guinea-Bissau, the coup occurred 2 weeks to the second round of the election. So a complete election had been conducted and a short list had been drawn to be, entered into the next round. And 2 weeks before that election could be conducted, there was a coup. So it was an election that was preempted. In this case, the election is conducted, and when we are expecting the results, there is a coup. So it is not the election per se that's been preempted, but the declaration of the results, which is
Mr. David, let me chip in here. Earlier on, you chipped in that Embalo is still in charge, and a lot of West Africans will want you to shed more light on that. How is Embalo still in charge when we have a junta that has actually conducted a constitutional review and completed such a process?
Well, the very foremost thing, let's consider the caliber of people who first floated this idea. Even though at the time, the coup was announced, everyone who is in the know had that suspicion. So we have Goodluck Jonathan, a very prominent, very well-respected member of the ECOWAS community, coming out to vocally say that the coup is a ceremonial coup. I mean, that in itself says a lot. If we are talking about the credibility of, the ones making the allegations, Goodluck Jonathan is as credible as it gets. And then we have Sonko in Senegal also making claims along the same line. I mean, considering, diplomatic considerations and the implications that such statements would naturally have, for these men to have made those pronouncements, that means they knew where they were coming from. Not to talk about the fact that the president tried to postpone the election as long as possible, and every reason that was given for that by analysts suggested that it was because he was trying to circumvent an imminent loss. So when you put all these factors together, it requires something beyond logic to come to the conclusion that this happened naturally and wasn't orchestrated by, people in power at the time Mbalo was.
Well, Mr. David, yes, please go ahead, Usman.
Before Imo comes in, I just wanted to ask, where does this now leave regional bodies such as ECOWAS and African Union, who of course always, wants to observe elections in and around West Africa? The other part of Africa has to do with AU. Because foundationally, we already have a challenge, a constitution that was reviewed by the military, from what you have said, orchestrated by a president who just didn't want so that election result to be declared. Where does this leave organizations like ECOWAS and AU in the future when Guinea-Bissau wants to conduct an election?
So this particular issue in Guinea-Bissau is probably the most difficult test for the credibility of ECOWAS in particular, because prior to the election, there had been a number of developments in Guinea-Bissau, which one would have naturally expected ECOWAS to intervene in and, put grievances to rest, but that didn't happen. So let's begin with the very first dissolution of the parliament under Mbalo. Constitutionally, that move didn't fly because the Guinea-Bissau constitution doesn't, contrary to maybe popular understanding, it doesn't allow the president to just up and dissolve parliament. He doesn't have that power. The constitution is dissolved in consultation with the opposition and with parliament and even the Supreme Court. So once the president suggests dissolving the
parliament,
the National Assembly, the leaders in parliament also have to chip in, whether they agree or disagree. And once there is a disagreement, it has to go to the Supreme Court, where the ultimate decision is finally made. In this case, we had a unilateral decree, and then the National Assembly being locked down. Parliamentarians who tried to access the building were tear gassed. So it was basically by means of brute force that the National Assembly was dissolved that time. This is, it was a particular target that Mbalo had hinted at throughout his administration, how much parliament was an impediment and a nuisance to his administration. And parliament was the problem, you see, and the fact that he's able to do this, so casually without any retort from the regional body or any significant backlash, that in itself is quite disturbing. And it didn't happen once, it happened twice.
Well, does that mean
It
this?
happened twice.
Yeah, I mean, so just to add, Mr. David, I mean, the changes we've seen strengthens, gives him more executive power, and this include what you've mentioned, you know, the ability to dissolve the National Assembly without any consultation. But again, how do you think this will reshape the balance of power during future elections and governance?
I think that is the one area where we need to be particularly concerned, because with its previously semi-presidential system, there was some kind of power sharing, or there was an understanding that the president didn't hold all the power. In this case, even though the new constitution is insisting that it is still semi-presidential, the president holds virtually all the power. Under such an institution, where are the checks and balances? And remember, Mbalo got away with so much with checks and balances. So what happens in a situation where these checks and balances don't even exist constitutionally to begin with? That is the challenge that we should be looking at. And right now that the prime minister is more or less subordinate to the president, who is next in line to challenge his authority? Is it Parliament? Because he has also been given considerable powers of control to do away with anything that Parliament may suggest. So as regards that one particular individual into whom this new constitution is telling us that it is vesting so much power, how are those powers being checked? That is the primary question that the National Transition Council needs to answer regarding this constitution. How are the president's powers being contained? Because we already have evidence of what it is like when these powers aren't contained.
All right, seeing what has been done in Guinea-Bissau with the constitutional review, and as you have rightly mentioned, the new constitution as amended gives, as reviewed rather, gives the president a lot more powers. Now, you of course work with an organization that is interested in everything West Africa, and you also see how constitution has empowered a lot of presidents around Africa with so much power. And now the question I want to ask is, how does this expose the power gap between the people being governed and those who finally have access to government by the very document that actually serves as the ground norm for governance in these countries? I'm speaking from Nigeria's experience, for instance, where you see the president having so much power to such a point where he can just say, I haven't observed ABC security situation, it's also state, so governor, state of emergency has been declared. And these things are contained in our constitutions. I don't know, but from your own viewpoint, going forward, should citizens begin to pay more attention to some of these provisions in the constitutions that set them up against the very people that they end up electing to, provide governance for them?
Thank you. Yeah, I think you went off for a while, but so let's take the case of Guinea-Bissau. The first question one needs to ask is, in this particular constitutional review process, where are the people? There was no mention of a referendum, nothing. So where are the people to begin with? To answer your question, basically, like, where are the people that are supposed to be, covered by this constitution, the very people on whose behalf this exercise was being undertaken? Where are they to begin with? And like you rightly said, I think it's about time on a grassroots, individual citizen level, people take these things more seriously, because the challenge of, that imbalance, that disproportionate distribution of power is so ingrained that even ECOWAS itself as a regional body isn't exempt from it. We need to begin to question some of these situations. In ECOWAS, for example, who challenges the authority of the heads of state?
Nobody.
Nobody. Meanwhile, there's a parliament. What's the function of that parliament? And there's an ECOWAS court whose decisions, the last time I heard, about 80 or 78% of ECOWAS court decisions are disregarded. They are not even flouted. They are just the challenge is ingrained from the very top. And the only way we can get around this is with more citizen involvement, because institutions cannot do it alone. At some point, when you enter the room with, the administrators of power, you are maybe 1 or 2 people against a panel of, say, 8 or 10. Meanwhile, whatever you are presenting is in the interests of about 400 million people. Where are those 400 million people when you enter the room? And that is where the conversation needs to start from at the moment. How do we create avenues where the interests and the voice of the people are more significantly represented at the decision-taking level? Because once that doesn't happen and decision-making remains, a monopoly of some 12 presidents, then we cannot really expect much by way of how we are governed in our individual member states.
Indeed.
So,
well, Mr. David, just to take your final thought on this as we wrap up the conversation because of time. In the future, what should we be looking at, or what do you think will be happening in the coming days with ECOWAS calling or asking for a short-term transition in Guinea-Bissau?
So my first question about that will be, what exactly is short-term? Because 1 month could be short-term, 2 months could be short-term. The junta is proposing a 1-year transition, which, in comparison to what we've seen in the sub-region so far, with what's occurred in Mali, Burkina, even Guinea, is short. Guinea had a 3-year transition. And Mali, Burkina, and Niger cannot even be said to have really transitioned, because regarding power at that side, no one can fully explain what's really going on. But when ECOWAS says it wants a short-term transition, what does it exactly mean? And what are the functions of the junta within that short-term transition? Does it include reviewing the constitution? What exactly are the dynamics of this short-term engagement that they are calling for? I think we need to be more specific in that regard. Other than that, I think what needs to happen now is for maybe individual leaders within the bloc to engage unilaterally with Guinea-Bissau and find a very peaceful means to restore constitutional order to the country. Because ECOWAS hasn't really lived up to expectation in this case. Sorry to say.
All right. Well, that's the much we can take on this edition of Citizens Hour. Many thanks to our guests who have been looking at this issue of constitutional review in Guinea-Bissau. Mr. David Asante Dakar, research analyst with West Africa Democracy Solidarity Network. WADR. Mr. David, thank you so much for your time, and we appreciate you being a part of the program.
I'm also grateful to have been part of the discussion.
Indeed.
Do enjoy the rest of your day.
And you too. Well, that's it from us here in Dakar. It's been Citizens Hour. Thank you so much for your time. I am Imo Edet Usman. Well, and of course, we heard there Usman Umara in Abuja also anchoring the program. We thank you so much for your time, and we thank all of our viewers on Facebook and YouTube being a part of the program. Coming up at the top of the hour is our midday news with Abdullah Hassan. And many thanks to our production team led by Maudo Juf and Mustafa Seg. So we'll come your way same time next week. Goodbye. This 2026 Citizens Hour returns live on radio. Renewed, more interactive, and closer to you. You can now join us live every Saturday on West Africa Democracy Radio, 94.9 FM in Dakar, starting 9 a.m. to 10:30 a.m. in French, and from 10:30 a.m. to 11:55 a.m. in English. You can also follow our live streamings on Facebook and YouTube. Citizens Hour is your space to speak up. You can now comment live on issues, ask questions, and engage directly with our presenters and invited experts as we unpack major developments shaping West Africa. Make your voice heard. Be part of the conversation every Saturday from 9 a.m. to 11:30 a.m. in French and 10:30 a.m. to 11:55 a.m. in English. Well, if you missed the show, catch the rebroadcast 6 p.m. in English and 7:30 p.m. in French. Citizens Hour is your time to speak.